this isn't terrorism. This is hooliganism, and it has to be stopped.
This isn't just hooliganism. This is a land grab.
Those settlers are acting in total impunity because people like you are supporting them.
To say that these violent settlers are like football hooligans, that is whitewashing of the most extreme degree.
Hello and welcome to The Forecast. In the West Bank village of Qusra, extremist Israeli settlers have spent days besieging Palestinian homes, cutting residents off from water and food. And all this is an attack that has drawn widespread international condemnation, with Donald Trump's ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, even calling it an horrific act of terror. But this incident, according to the latest data, is part of a massive escalation in settler violence in the occupied West Bank this year. So can Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, who have at times condemned the violence, but have also done so much to embolden the settlers, rein it in? And even if they can, will they choose to? Well, to discuss all this, I'm joined by the former Israeli ambassador to Canada, Alan Baker, who is part of a commission set up by Benjamin Netanyahu to investigate the legality of settlements in the West Bank. We're also joined by Palestinian ambassador to UNESCO, Adel Atiyah, and the Haaretz senior analyst, Esther Solomon. Welcome to you all. Esther, tell me what happened in Qusra, because there are very conflicting reports. And the latest we've heard, from the Times of Israel, is that the IDF has basically, is trying to control the settlers and has told the Palestinian people, the residents, to stay there. Tell us what you understand is actually going on in Qusra. Esther.
Well, it all started really on Sunday when a group of settlers established what they call an outpost, very close to two relatively isolated Palestinian homes on the outskirts of the village of Qusra, which is, just for a bit of geography, south of Nablus, north of Jerusalem, and a direct line eastwards from Tel Aviv. So they blocked these Palestinian families inside their homes. They were kind of building a settlement around them and started throwing stones at the houses as well. Now, the homes are in Area B, which is supposed to be under both Israeli and Palestinian civil control and security control. But basically, these settlers came and cut them off from the rest of the village. Days and days passed where there was this siege in progress, and there were reports coming out that, the families were basically hiding in their homes and being attacked by more and more settlers who were coming. At a later stage, in the middle of the week, yesterday, the Israeli security forces belatedly began to try and remove the settlers. Some of their efforts utterly failed. They came, they tried to move them out. And in fact, there were even videos showing some of the soldiers socializing with the settlers, having a bit of joining in a prayer that they did there. So there was clearly not real motivation to get rid of this group of settlers who were there. Now, today, everything has gone up slightly a gear, not least because the international community is now much more focused on what's going on, and that seems to be the only way that anything actually changes. And after, for instance, the US ambassador to Israel intervened as well and called what was going on, disgusting, criminal, thuggish. He even called the settlers Israeli terrorists, which is a very, very strong choice of words, especially for someone like Mike Huckabee.
Yeah. He's not used that language before, has he?
He certainly hasn't. In fact, he is, right to the bone, a fervent proponent of Greater Israel, of the annexation of the West Bank. So there clearly is a red line that is being crossed, even for people who are fervent supporters of Israel and of the settlement enterprise. So the IDF today has attempted to remove these settlers with only partial success. This is the IDF that, has the capacity to level cities at will and is finding it apparently incredibly difficult to move a small group of extremely violent settlers out of territory over which it has security control.
I want to give the others a chance to weigh in a minute, Esther, but just briefly with you, I mean, the kind of violence, the kind of action that you describe is hardly new, but what's different this time? Why has it crossed a red line? Why is Mike Huckabee, who's a friend of the idea of settlements, and you call him someone who's pro-annexation, he might not say that himself, but that's kind of the direction he's been in. Why has this suddenly called him to call them Israeli terrorists?
Well, it's coming at a particularly unfortunate and inconvenient time, especially for the Trump White House. This is not a time that they want yet another front to be boiling over in the Middle East. They've got a lot to deal with already on their plate. They have a ceasefire with Iran that is kind of collapsing. They have negotiations with Lebanon that are still ongoing. There is the whole situation with the disarmament of Hamas in Gaza and the ceasefire there that is extraordinarily rocky right now. And they have absolutely no interest in the West Bank going up in flames. But unfortunately, there are significant figures within the Israeli government who want just that.
Right. Adele, we're going to talk about the broader context of what's been happening in the West Bank, how much the settlers have increased their activities, especially since October the 7th. But do you see the IDF getting involved in the way that they have been just in the last 24 hours as a positive development? And do you think that if America is getting angry with the settlers and with Netanyahu about this issue, that you might see a significant change in America's policy towards this or not?
Well, a positive development is something very big to say, because those settlers have been acting during, it's not new, settlers' violence is not new. It has been going for almost 57 years since the occupation in 1967. But what is new today with the settlers' violence that is becoming a real terror organized acts is that it happens with the participation of the Israeli soldiers and under the protection of the Israeli army. So then not also they do not stop those settlers of carrying terror attacks against Palestinians, but they are involved in organizing and in carrying out those attacks against Palestinians. And this is what is really extremely dangerous, which encourages those band of gangs to continue attacking the Palestinian communities. We have at least 7 attacks per day since 2024. Mosques, churches are torched, villages attacks. And if the American ambassador is using finally the right word to qualify those acts as acts of terror, it is because too many Israeli officials from the security establishment already listen to Ehud Olmert, listen to Barak, to Ehud Barak, or to Ami Ayalon, whom were qualifying, describing those acts as acts of organized terrorism, organized terror settlers against Palestinians. And I think this is the right way, this is the right word to qualify them, because this is an organized movement. It is supported by the army. And I am afraid that this will turn on a state-sponsored terrorism, because the state Israel is not acting to stop those people, to deter them from continuing attacking the Palestinian communities. Let me give an example of only 5% of those settlers is stopped and questioned by the Israeli police, and only 1% is sent to court for minor acts and for minor crimes, what the judges describe them as minor acts. So those groups are acting in total impunity with the support of Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and those are members of government, and therefore it is widely believed that the government stands behind those groups. But Alan, if I may put a question to Esther, what would happen, Esther, if I come from Ramallah with a group of friends, a Palestinian gang, and put a tent in your courtyard in Tel Aviv? Please give us a precise description. What would happen to me immediately?
It's a very good question because it gets to exactly the heart of what is not happening there. Obviously, I would call the police, and the police would answer my call, and the police would come, and the police would use the rule of law to move you away. And all of those things simply don't happen.
Well, why don't we ask Alan that question? Alan Baker, what would happen if Adil planted his tent in your garden with a flag to say, this is now my land? What would you do, Alan?
Yeah, as I still said, I'd call the police and have them remove him. But I think we've been traveling a bit too far.
But hang on a second, but let me just ask, so if that happens to Palestinians in their villages, in an area which they've been living in for as long as they can remember, and it is their land, as it were, you know, if you planted your flag in their territory and the tent, and you got your family to move there, you would expect to be moved out by their authorities, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. Look, I'm not justifying it. I think there are hooligans who are acting illegally and doing what they shouldn't be doing, and they should be removed. Hooligans anywhere have to be brought to justice and have to be punished. Whether it's hooligans at football matches, whether it's hooligans in demonstrations, whether it's other hooligans who are irresponsibly and stupidly establishing tents in Arab villages. It can't happen, and it should be stopped. But I think by taking this in exaggerated directions and calling it terrorism, I think is going a bit too far. I think Adel knows very well what terrorism is, and we all know what terrorism is. And this isn't terrorism. This is hooliganism, and it has to be stopped, and it's illegal. And that's the beginning and end of it.
I mean, you equate it to hooliganism, Alan, but let me say again, I mean, these people are, terrorizing these communities. They're not just going in and out to beat someone up. They want to stay there. They want to claim that land as theirs. And they've had success in this. I mean, in the last 4 years, 102 new settlements have been established in the West Bank, in the occupied West Bank. And that's compared to that's in the last 4 years, compared to a total of 120 settlements in the last 50 years. So the rate of annexing property and land has increased exponentially since October the 7th. So this isn't just hooliganism, this is a land grab.
Well, you're using terms, annexation is something that you're exaggerating in your terms. Look, if people want to establish a settlement, there are legal ways of doing this. It's a question of who owns the land, whether the land is privately owned or not privately owned. I was a member of a government commission to look into the legality of settlements, and there's nothing illegal in establishing settlements as long as it's not taking private land. And so don't generalize those people that are doing what they're doing on private Palestinian land are carrying out criminal acts and have to be stopped. That's the beginning and end of it.
Okay, maybe Esther can help me out with this one. There is a subtle difference which you're skirting over there, Alan, isn't there? That there has been a move under this government to move away from the military occupation or the military authority, as it were, over the West Bank and go towards a civilian authority. So it's now the government which can decide on land issues of land registry. So actually it's more than just a hooligan going in and putting up an illegal tent. It is actually a very smart and move to try and occupy land with the eventual idea, we are led to believe, of annexation. Esther, is that correct or not?
Since the moment this government was established, and it was published its platforms openly at the end of 2022. It said that one of its main aims was to entrench Israeli control over the West Bank, and thus it has done. And after the appalling acts of October the 7th, but ever since, it has used the cover of the Gaza war also to speed up that process. There are people in this government for whom this is literally, the greatest mission of their lives, and this is what they're sent to do, with a messianic mission to do this. And it is happening not just, it's not just that the military is collaborating in many ways. There are government ministries that are dedicated to doing this at a rate and in a comprehensive manner that we haven't seen before. And I just have to say one thing. To say that these violent settlers are like football hooligans, that is just simply, that is whitewashing of the most extreme degree. I don't understand how someone can get to something like that. First of all, the definition of terrorism is an act of violence for political aims, and that's exactly what they are doing. They're not doing it just
they're not murdering people.
Smash up an old guy because they're drunk or something, or because they support a different team.
They're not terrorists who are murdering and raping people. They're doing illegal
Terrorism
things.
doesn't have to require murder and rape in any way. Settlers have killed. It's simply not true.
Stop exaggerating. Stop exaggerating. Sorry, you're exaggerating.
Maybe the term terrorism is a little bit misleading here, even though the American ambassador has used it about the people that we're describing. But the point is, Alan, it is not just a one-off act of violence or hooliganism. It is there as part of a mission to occupy land and to keep it. That's the point, isn't it, Alan?
No, I'm sorry. Look, whether land will be kept is subject to whatever political agreement is reached between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Oslo Accords determine, and it's been agreed upon by both sides, that there'll be negotiation to determine the permanent status of the land. It can't be determined by unilateral individual acts, by hooligans or terrorists or however you want to call them. So, true, there are ministers in the government who are, as Esther says, they've got this messianic mission. Well, they're perfectly entitled to have a messianic mission. But in the end, what determines is what the government does. And according to the law, they can't just grab land without going through a legal process. And as an international lawyer involved in this, I can assure Esther and Adel and anybody else who tends to exaggerate that this can't happen as much as these government ministers might want it to happen.
Okay, so under international law, let's be clear, these settlements are illegal, right? They should not happen. Adel, yes, they are.
They're not.
Absolutely,
they're
they
not. No, they're not.
Well,
I'm sorry. As an international lawyer, I can tell you that there's absolutely no prohibition on settlements as long as it's not taking private land.
But that's what they're doing. They are taking private land.
Well, they're trying to take private land, but they're not allowed to.
But Adel, are you sufficiently reassured by what you heard from Alan?
It's very disturbing because he is an expert in international law, and I wonder how many times did he read resolutions adopted by the Security Council, and whether he knows that there is an advisory opinion by the International Justice Court which qualified this occupation as a lawful occupation. And the second point, please,
advisory opinions.
Let him finish.
Those settlers are acting in total impunity because people like you are supporting them. Come on, Alan.
No.
A terrorist, you said Adel knows about terrorism. I am a terrorist because I throw a stone at an armed Israeli vehicle, but those terrorists whom are burning torching entire villages in Palestine, that they are torching churches and they are burning mosques, including in my village. You call them hooligan, but you call me a terrorist because I throw a stone on an Israeli military armored vehicle. This is your definition of terrorism. Come on, let's have an intellectual integrity. Let's have a moral integrity. Those are terrorist group. And what I'm saying that what is dangerous in this phenomenon of settlers, you call it violence, I call it terrorism, because they are terrorizing my family, because they come and put their flag in my courtyard, because the settlement that is constructed on the confiscated land of my parents is illegal. Whatever you call it, it is on the confiscated land of my parents. There is a settlement built there. And if I need to buy milk or bread, I am not allowed to go to that settlement. If I enter in that settlement, I am immediately shooted. What are those settlers are doing in the Palestinian villages under the cover and the protection of the Israeli army? Why do they need to go in the Palestinian villages? 28 Palestinians this year were shooted by the settlers. I want you just to tell me, if the Israeli army will see me throwing a stone to an Israeli army, what will happen? I will be shooted immediately. Those people are torching our homes, are burning our lives under the protection of a government. This is not a group, a terror groups. This is a state terrorism sponsored by a country, sponsored by a state and its ministers. And we have to recognize that your life is not more valuable than my life. If what you, if
can I respond?
Let Alan. Okay, Adel, let Alan respond.
I try not to get into the emotional elements of this. Of course, it's unfortunate that somebody's home is intruded into, and it's illegal, and it has to be stopped. And in as much as the Israeli authorities aren't doing what they should be doing, then they should be doing more. But you can't come along and say that this is terrorism, and you can't come along and say that settlements are illegal, because settlements aren't illegal if they're established in accordance with the law. And according to the agreements between the Israelis and the Palestinians, there is the two sides agree to the possibility of establishing settlements as long as it's not done in violation of land rights.
Right. But the 102 settlements have been established in the last 4 years, and the last time I checked, the vast majority of those were set up illegally. They were not set up in accordance even with the Oslo Accords, so they are illegal settlements. And by the way, I've seen with my own eyes how this process works. When settlers go in, they block the wells, they cut off the roads, they cut the electricity. They're doing everything they can in a campaign of, call it what you like, intimidation, terrorism, to remove those people from the place that they have lived in as their home for decades, right? So that is an illegal activity. Yes.
And they have to be removed.
But often they're not removed. The IDF stands by and doesn't remove them.
Well, they should be removed. And
they should be, but they're not being removed.
They should be removing them.
Esther, tell me, you've heard both sides of the argument. What has the IDF actually done to restrain the settlers, not just in the last few days, but in the last few years?
Well, just simply not enough. And much of the time, they are giving a strong impression that there is some kind of complicit support or explicit support for what the settlers are doing. So there have been numerous occasions on which Palestinians have called for or reported that settlers are assaulting their homes or themselves personally. And it can be anything from an extraordinary delay in response by the IDF, no response at all, a response where soldiers come, have a look, and then drive off again, to the lightest rap on the knuckles for violence perpetrated by the settlers themselves. But you have to remember that the IDF has a political boss. This is not an army that operates in some kind of vacuum. And that's the important thing here. Not just that this is a government that, as I mentioned before, this is a mission to entrench more Israeli settlements and to make the idea of a future Palestinian state an impossibility. But we are also 75 days away from an extremely fateful general election here in Israel. And you cannot separate that from any political decision that is being made. Netanyahu, apart from the fact that he is a perpetual campaigner, but now everything is really on steroids, and everything that he is doing, he has with one eye on the polls and all of the possible votes that he can scrape together, because at the moment he does not have a majority, and he needs to try and pull as many votes, partly from the right, partly from the centre-right, partly from the far right, to all come together and back him. And you have to see everything in this context. Right. It is in his political interest for there to be a state of crisis somewhere on Israel's borders. Iran is not much of an option now because Trump has taken it off the table for now. There's always Gaza that could happen. Lebanon is not much of an option because there are negotiations going on. But the West Bank is a prime place for that to happen. Because if there is some kind of security conflagration there that is set by settler attacks like we are seeing in Qusra, then there is no proper political debate anymore leading up to the elections, because the security situation will suffocate all of it. And that's what he wants.
Are you saying that he's trying to provoke a third intifada in the run-up to the elections?
Certainly there are people in his government for whom that has been an explicit mission for years now. And from everything that we can see, it seems like that is certainly an option that Netanyahu is considering, whether explicitly or implicitly. Because there is no way on earth that he can't stand up. He could have stood up on Tuesday, on Wednesday, or this morning and said, that's enough. Let's just deal with the situation. He won't do that because he risks alienating the settler voters that he needs.
Right. He would obviously deny that he's trying to provoke a third intifada. I could see Alan shaking his head as well. But Alan, just on the settlement, you might want to respond to that too, but just on the settlements, those 102 settlements that have been occupied since, October the 7th, you're saying that, the jury is still out on whether they will actually be settlements forever. Their status is in dispute, as it were. But can you truly imagine the settlers living in those settlements saying, okay, we'll give it up. It's not our land anymore. We'll give it back to the Palestinians.
Well, look, the difference between myself and the other participants in this interview is that I don't come from a political orientation. I don't represent the Haaretz newspaper, which is a distinctly anti-Netanyahu newspaper, and I don't represent the Palestinian villages, as does Adel. I'm an international lawyer, and
But you're a friend of the Prime Minister's, aren't you? You're a friend of Prime Minister Netanyahu.
No, I'm not a friend of anybody.
So maybe you represent his point of view.
I'm a friend of my wife.
Right. Okay.
Not of the Prime Minister. I don't represent the Prime Minister, and I don't represent any of the political parties. I represent international law. And I drafted and participated in negotiating the Oslo Accords, including negotiating with some very serious Palestinian negotiators. And we agreed that only in the event that we come to an agreed negotiation on the permanent status of the territories, that will include issues such as settlements, Jerusalem, and other major issues. So for a representative of the Haaretz newspaper to come and talk about Netanyahu's policies, it's not the same level that I'm talking on.
Okay, let me ask you just a couple of very brief questions, Alan, if I may. Do you think that, a two-state solution with a Palestinian state next to the Jewish state of Israel is still possible as outlined in the Oslo Accords, or is that gone? Is that done and dusted?
Well, first of all, the Oslo Accords doesn't say anything about a Palestinian state. The Oslo Accords, and I was involved in drafting them, so I know, the Oslo Accords talk about the fact that there will be permanent status negotiations, which will end up in either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 states, whatever is agreed upon, or a confederation or a condominium or a federation. It doesn't say that there will be a Palestinian state. This two-state solution
it lays out the path towards a Palestinian state, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It doesn't say that.
We've all read the Oslo Accords. You may have drafted them. Let's ask the other two. Adel, do you see the Oslo Accords as something that lays a path towards a Palestinian state? Is that how you read them or not?
This is our interpretation and our understanding that the Oslo Accord should have led to the establishment of at least to put an end to this apartheid regime, occupation, military, colonial regime by the end of 1999. And I really, I'm very surprised if you are an international jurist. What shall we say about what shall we say about Netanyahu? I mean, this is a denial of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination in an independent state living side by side in peace and security with Israel. I am recognizing as a representative of the Palestinian Authority the right of Israel to exist and the right of Israel to security, and you are denying the right of the Palestinian people to have an independent state equally like the Israelis and to live in peace with the Palestinians. This is very astonishing that we are 35 years
come and negotiate with Israel. Come and negotiate.
To negotiate if you agree, as long as you deny my right to have an independent state, what shall we negotiate about?
Can I just say something? Can I just say something? I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu, in response to Donald Trump's 15-point Gaza disarmament plan, said very clearly, because that plan also envisages a path towards a Palestinian state, he said very clearly, there will be no Palestinian state on my watch. He said it very clearly. So whatever you interpret the law to be, Alan, your friend, Prime Minister Netanyahu, does not want there to be okay, whatever.
I'm sorry,
the guy who used to be your friend. Okay.
Never.
Your Prime Minister does not want there to be a Palestinian state. That's what he said. Right? That's his interpretation of the law.
But that's his viewpoint. And whether there will be a Palestinian state or not depends on the outcome of negotiations. In the meantime, the Palestinians are refusing to come and negotiate.
What if I stand, not the Palestinian president and not the Palestinian prime minister, just a senior diplomat like myself, and say between the river and the sea, there is only one people whom have the right to establish their state, whom are the Palestinians. Your prime minister, your friend Netanyahu, just yesterday, he said there will never be an independent state of Palestine as long as I am alive. This is the denial of the existence of the Palestinian Authority. And you are inviting me to come and to negotiate with him. To negotiate about what? To negotiate about ethnically cleansing the Palestinian, to negotiate about how he would kick me out of my land, to negotiate about how he will destroy, annex, confiscated our properties and destroy the infrastructures of our institution. Come on, let's be serious. Let's be serious. This is what the current government is doing, is fueling violence. And back to the settlers and settlers terrorism. As I said, what is very alarming in the current days that those acts are organized. Those acts are with the support of the army and with incentives. The government of the state of Israel are paying those settlers to go to live in those settlements with financial incentives. It's not an individual act. This is a state policy. Israel is encouraging those acts of terrorism to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, to kill the prospect for a two-state solution, exactly como Alan described the situation.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up. Esther, final word to you. Because the other two have somewhat dominated the discussion. Final word to you. Do you think that there will ever be an independent Palestinian state, yes or no?
That's not a yes or no. That's one of those trick questions that you that analysts try very hard not to answer, not least because it requires an element of prophecy that unfortunately I don't possess. You know, what I personally would like, what I think analytically is correct, what is, according to international law, what would be the most humane situation? Yes, I think that there should be a two-state solution. Do I think we're almost further away from that than we ever have been? More or less. Yeah. Yes, it is a huge, huge gap.
Okay, well, that was pretty lively and I hope instructive as well. Thank you very much to all three of you, Alan Baker, Esther Solomon, and Adel Atir. That's it for the forecast. Hope you found it illuminating. See you next time.